Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, October 17th. I'm Eric Kirkenberger, and this is the weekly SIG testing meeting. It's being publicly recorded and will be posted to YouTube shortly. Big thanks to Jeff for hosting and recording the meeting last week, since I dropped off the face of the earth and forcibly removed Slack and all things electronic from my life for a week. Since I'm still primarily in catch-up mode, I kind of wanted to just discuss what we're planning on doing for 1.9 and Q4 in general. The other thing I missed last week was giving a SIG testing update to the community, so I will go ahead and do that this week, and I just wanted some kind of lazy consensus that I, roughly speaking, have the themes down to a point where I could prattle on about them and all the other cool stuff I did in that dry run a couple weeks ago in the space of 10 minutes. So I linked the meeting notes in chat, and I'll leave some room at the end to talk about Bazel, or maybe we can talk about that in the context of what we're doing for 1.9. So basically, the way I did things for 1.8, right, was Eric put together this Google Doc of everything we had planned sort of for the 1.8 timeframe and then 2017 goals in general. And then I tried to go through and convert all of those to GitHub issues and assign them to people as they had sort of signed up for them in the Google Doc. I think that worked okay, with the exception that I felt like we didn't go back and reconcile whether or not those issues were actually relevant anymore or whether progress had been made on them. So what I'd like to try and do this time around is to maybe just periodically revisit that milestone every week, every 2 weeks, something like that, and make sure we're still using that, if we can, as the source of truth for what's going on. I think there was there was a lot of awesome work that's done, and I don't necessarily want to add friction, but it seems like a lot of the cool things that were worth bragging about were things that just happened and didn't so much get added to the milestone. So I kind of had to go back and scrape through by what got merged today and why was this issue closed and things like that. So I think being able to use the milestones to help triage there would help. So I created a 1.9 milestone, and I've created a 2018 goals milestone for things that we think are cool and relevant, but we're not going to get to this year, and then bright, shiny next year we will, maybe. So I recognize I have a lot of reconciliation to do between the 1.9 Google Doc, which basically was a copy-paste of everything in 1.8, crossed out all the things we think we got done, added some cool new shiny things there. That's more or less what I'm going for as the source of truth, and based on my glance of that, I came up with the following themes for release. So I think that basically we're trying to end-of-life as many things as we can. We're really trying to end-of-life Jenkins, and we're trying to end-of-life Munge GitHub, pointing both things in the direction of Prowl. So for Jenkins, I believe this means we need a call to action where we need to herd people to actually migrate their jobs off of Jenkins and over to Prowl. This is probably going to be the most painful aspect of this, I would imagine. The scale jobs are the only ones that I am intimately familiar with. But I suspect there are other jobs that, they've lived on Jenkins this long because they're special. So they may be sort of a case-by-case basis. But this is why I want to call this out first to the community as a call to action. So if there are people we specifically need help with, or people from SIGs we need to designate to help us out with this, I'd like to see if we can do that. And we sort of commit to, we'll make sure that we provide folks to help out with the transition away from Jenkins, and look how cool and shiny Prowl is. I can do that by sort of bragging about all the test info improvements we've done lately. But we really, it's time. We've got to do this. As far as Munge GitHub goes, Cole gave me sort of his planned migration of most of the mungers out of Munge GitHub to Prowl plugins. I'll put that in an issue and try and sort of do a timeline for here's the things we plan on rolling away from Munge GitHub over the next quarter in as non-disruptive a way as possible. I think the one thing that Cole punted on was cherry picking. And that seems like kind of a critical thing for cutting point releases and patch releases. So if we don't come up with a way to solve cherry picking this quarter via Prowl or Tide or something to that effect, we still have to continue to support Munge GitHub.
Mincalis is currently very close to finish with a prop plugin that automates cherry picking between branches.
That is awesome. Okay, I was not aware of that. Like wildly underwater. If you can paste a link to that in Slack or something, just to help bring it to my attention, that would be cool. And then the final end of life thing is we'd like to hopefully end of life the submit queue. We're going to be so happy with how Tide works that we want to just shut off the submit queue entirely. You know, we live in a world right now where there are end submit queue instances for end repos. Not all of the repos have submit queue turned on. We've been trialing Tide on test infra. I'm kind of curious to hear feedback from the group on how we think that's been going. But at some point here, we want to turn Tide on for everything and then use it going forward. And I think maybe I had said in the past, one prerequisite for me personally is to show an actual live demo of Tide with some kind of UI at the community meeting to show folks that this is real and this is the way this now works for those of you who were used to using the submit queue. I don't think we're yet at that point, but like that's sort of the coming soon preview I can announce to the community. Okay, next major theme is a better support policy. So instead of supporting all the things, we want to support a very few well-scoped things. This starts with the document that Jace has been working on, where we actually have some kind of SLA, or we use some kind of label to designate issues as things that are blocking the queue and need to be worked on. We were spitballing the idea of potentially having a status page possibly driven by this, or possibly manually updated by whoever the on-call person is. And a lot of work has been going into metrics and how to alert based on those metrics, or how to alert from test grid in a meaningful way to make sure that we can respond more quickly to failures before our user and developer community notices that the submit queue seems to have stopped working.
Question on this. I mean, is this something that we intend to be an ongoing problem? Or I guess I'm wondering if the move to devolve KK into many little repos will kind of remove the impact of release blocking tests for the most part. Because any project will have to be pinning. If there is a problem, they won't be impacted until they try to update their pin, in which case maybe they might have to deal with something if they've discovered a problem unique to their project. But I'm just wondering if like scoping this is a huge problem we have to solve indefinitely is maybe a little bit pessimistic.
It's possible. What I'd rather make sure that this is phrased in the perspective of, hey, look, there's an actual team of humans behind this, and instead of us being walled off in a secret area that only a few people know to go look at, that there's going to be more transparency to what the status of the project is and why things are moving slowly or quickly. I think that bright, shiny multi-repo future sounds great, but I think there's a lot of steps between here and there that need to be sorted out. And so in the interim, things like blocking the release and blocking the submit queue are phrases I've been encountering in issues in messages so far.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not saying that this isn't the reality today. I just to me, it's helpful to keep in mind where we're going towards so we don't invest too much energy in maintaining the status quo. We definitely want to make it better. Okay. We just don't want to invest in keeping it this way.
Okay, that's fair. I'll have to think about how to rephrase because
You don't have to rephrase. It's just kind of just to put that in people's heads.
To move forward, right? The next step is I want us to move to a future where it's not just a select few people who can support the infrastructure to run the entire project. I mean, right?
No arguments there.
Right now, it's just like the one repo. The problem is going to require more involvement by more people when we're responsible for shepherding 47 odd repos or however many are in the Kubernetes org right now. And so to that end, it seems like we kind of have the boring money step and logistics, and then we have documentation and stuff. And then there's all sorts of technical tools we can use to help us along the way. So the boring money stuff, I view a future where potentially the CNCF provides some cloud vendor agnostic cluster, or maybe they just provide funding for a cluster that runs just the existing test infra stack. So I'm thinking of things like Prow, and although we have it today and don't want to, Munch GitHub. And any of the other things that right now you just throw on the infra cluster to run periodically. So like the publishing thing, I would want to see the publisher also run on this. To get there, so maybe let me step back a little bit. When I talk with Eric about this, he'll throw up something like, well, look, if you look at Google's spend today for end-to-end testing the Kubernetes project, for all of the testing we provide the Kubernetes project, it's, let's say, ballpark $1 million a year, right? And that's money that the CNCF doesn't have. But that's money that's involved in spinning up all sorts of Kubernetes clusters for all sorts of scalability jobs and end-to-end tests for everything, and one-off tests and node tests and certifying different images and operating systems and all of that, right? I view a lot of that as specific to the Google cloud provider, and that is something I would hope that Google continues to fund. But for example, I don't think Google should continue to fund spinning up clusters in AWS, right? So to that end, since AWS joined the CNCF recently, we got them to kick us some credits to an AWS account. So I'd like to see us move to spinning up all the AWS clusters, which we do via COPS right now, in that AWS account. So then AWS can sort of become responsible for, if they feel like the fidelity of testing that's happening on AWS isn't sufficient to prove that Kubernetes is as awesome on AWS as it is on Google, they can provide more money, and then we can help sort of run more tests at larger or different scales or configurations in AWS. Then there's sort of moving in from that, there are all of the nodes that are responsible for running like Prow jobs right now. Or in today's world, it would also be like all of the Jenkins slaves and stuff that are responsible for just sitting there and kicking the clusters off and then running tests against those clusters and aggregating the results, right? And then moving further inwards, there's Prow and Munch GitHub itself, which are responsible for taking things in from GitHub and actually running the tests and doing stuff. And it's that like inner core there that I think most of the troubleshooting and stuff of interest to the community where more folks could help. That's the thing I think that would be helpful for the CNCF to use, especially as we start to see other projects. I know Cole had mentioned something about TensorFlow, right? And we've had Istio, which may one day be a CNCF project. I think it kind of makes sense to start to figure out what it would take to migrate this stack to within the walls of CNCF. So that could just be a GKE cluster that's funded by CNCF. It could be that we decide we want to spin it up in the AWS account, or maybe it's got to be a bare metal cluster or something. I'm not sure, but I think as a first step, it would involve identifying what that testing for stack is. What are the things that run the infra cluster? What do we reasonably expect it would take to run all that in perpetuity, and come up with a number that we can hand to the CNCF. It's my intent to sort of raise this as an issue through the newfangled steering committee. Whatever. Still not entirely sure what that's going to look like, but I figure this is a good chance to test its powers for good. So yeah.
I guess what I'm hearing is that there's a goal of reducing the requirement for Google money and personnel to maintain the test infrastructure for Kubernetes, and to spread that load a little bit wider around participating organizations.
Yes.
Is that like an explicit goal? Because I'm kind of extracting it from what you're telling me, and I've heard it, in various other meetings. But like, if that's the goal, wouldn't it make sense to actually like figure out, like, do we have a target for how many other people, we get involved, for how many fewer Google people are involved, for how much less money Google's going to be spending? I mean, we don't have a target. How are we going to reach it?
No, I guess I really haven't thought that far ahead. It could be that I'm implicitly stating this, but what I guess I'm trying to do is remove the barriers as they come up. And the first biggest logistical barrier is all the infras running on a google.com owned GKE cluster, and we can't add non-Googlers to that. I think we have a sufficiently motivated set of individuals within this SIG who are knowledgeable enough about various aspects of the testing for stack that they could certainly help out. They'd be willing to help out. We don't have the credentials to actually jump in, right? So I don't know. At the moment, I don't feel a need to turn this into numbers in the name of reducing costs. My aim is really principally to reduce the number of companies that can support this project from n equals 1, which is Google, to n equals greater than 1, right? I don't so much care too much about the number of engineers nor the reduced spend.
So to that point, one of the primary drivers behind my question of where's Basil at is I don't really care about the entirety of test infra because I have already built something completely orthogonal. I know Steve already has the same thing on the OpenShift side, right? Like, well, they may have leveraged some of the things for test infra, but we have our own tooling, right? And so what I do care about is that the uniformity of the build artifacts and the release process is consistent, because if we rally on that specific target, that is a quantifiable piece of the puzzle that means that anybody can build a release. Every build of the binaries of main code base is a release artifact of some kind. And to me, that is like P0 importante. And I know that other people want the Bazel builds too, but I want them even more because I want to be able to build all the artifacts from mainline and get rid of Anago. And that way, from a cluster lifecycle perspective, everything that's there is just boom, done, one build, and you're good to go.
I agree with the principle there. Let's ask about, so Jeff, I'm looking at you. What's the feasibility of Bazel, and Bazel being the authoritative build?
So basically it works. The main thing we're still waiting on from the Bazel Go team is the full cross build support. And this is something that's still sort of in process. I know they're actively working on it. Right now there's like very limited cross build support for only native Go code. And I know they're like actually working on being able to support all of the various architectures we need to build for. Since we know we need to build for all the various Linux S390X and AMD 64 and ARM, all the variety of things. So they're working on basically being able to, I think currently, build the standard library and then like download, so only like support a few architectures because of that. They're working on being able to sort of arbitrarily build that. There's still an open question. Like I think some of the cross-platform stuff in Bazel itself is still sort of being developed and worked on. So I believe like in Bazel 0.7 or 0.8, which is coming out like in the next month or so, support there is improving as well. One of the challenges is like, I guess if you have any C Go code, you have to have a proper C cross-compiler toolchain in order to do all of that, which conveniently we already have because we already have to do that. So possibly we might be able to combine like our cross-build image plus Bazel and might be able to do that. But right now, like I know a bunch of people are already using Bazel sort of to build their clusters and run tests and things like that. It works great for that. It's just sort of the main thing that's blocking us from making it the de facto way to build Kubernetes is just we need to be able to build all the various architectures. And so that's kind of the last missing piece. But there is good progress on that. And so hopefully like in the next month or so, I've been basically meeting with the team weekly just to kind of track progress on that and make sure we're making progress there. But it's kind of where
so logistically, you might think 110, because I think pulling the trigger in a month on 1.9 might be a little hairy.
Yes, I agree. Like, I think, we, on the one hand, like we and the Bazel team would love if we could get for 1.9, but I'm also a little hesitant just given that it doesn't work yet. It's, we'll see what happens in the next week or two, but yeah, I'm a little worried about 1.9. I think 110, I know I keep saying this like every release. It's like, oh, well, not this release, but the next one. And it's very frustrating, but yeah.
Do you have stats or anything that you could share with regards to like, I know there's some people that, there's some, I don't know, tinker toy things on the ARM architecture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And vast majority is x86. But like, do we even care? I hope we don't care about S390X. Just saying.
Yeah.
We don't actually run tests against that architecture, so.
Right. There are some people, I guess IBM cares, and I think Power as well. There are some people that care. I don't know how large of a market, if anyone who's actually using that, I don't know. I know that, there's been a few people working on all that support, but I'm not sure who's actually using it. I do not know those details.
Yeah, it just seems a little weird for us to publish artifacts from the main repository if we haven't even done any testing on it. So like
Right.
so we have a cross-build product that we haven't tested, so.
Yeah. It would be good to try to pull in some of those people that are working on those architectures and see if we can actually get some real testing results. I know at some point there had been some kind of testing, but there hasn't been a whole lot. And so, yeah, we should maybe we should sort of say we expect some conformance testing results or something on these architectures if we're actually supporting them and maintaining them and building them as official releases and, spending all these cycles building all this stuff.
Yeah, if you're blocking on valid S390 builds, you might be blocking forever, right? So
yes. I mean, I think the thing is, thankfully, just because it's all built into Go and it's pretty much all the same, like once we, sort of unlock being able to build one of these alternative architectures, the rest should just follow. So, and I think like ARM, has at least slightly more, I don't actually know how large the ARM usage is, but at least it's a little bit more plausible, I think, than like S390X, but yeah.
I think it's the sort of thing that the principle's still worth sticking to or blocking for, right? I don't think we're yet at the point where it's worth being pragmatic about it. Yeah, okay. 110 was sort of my guess just based on where we're at today.
Right.
But it does sound like, to your point of just one more release, like it is actually pretty much usable for the happy path.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to help give us confidence, right, is Ben's work to actually involve Bazel shared builds in more of the actual jobs that are going to be exercised thousands and thousands of times between now and the end of the year.
Right.
Which will give us a lot of good confidence building data or bugs. Who knows?
But I think there's a PR from Mike Denise I need to review, and once that gets merged and used, I think we'll be able to do like a full build of Kubernetes cluster, et cetera, like on decent machine in like a minute or two. It's really fast, and incremental builds even faster. So it's really cool.
I need to talk with Jacob too as well about what we're doing for kubeadm because they turned it on already, from my understanding. So their blocking job already enables the Bazel build.
Right. Mm-hmm. Definitely need to coordinate that.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing, just to like cross-building, I think it's probably a viable position for us to hold that we want to enable the community to help us out. So while we may not necessarily have the resources to test on all of these architectures, we are making sure that we can build across all these architectures to allow other people to help us vet that Kubernetes runs on their particular platform of interest.
Right.
And then you can push it to the certified Kubernetes land if you want to for like what is officially supported and stuff.
I know there's an effort on our end to do testing on multi-arch. Sorry, so I will ask Jason DeTabros, who's working on that, to probably get in touch with you, Aaron, because I think they're making pretty good progress on it.
Awesome.
Okay. So
I also, one remark on like general 1.9 goals, which I don't think I've done a really good job of putting into the doc, but I think from our end, one of the two things that we're probably going to be focusing on the most moving forward is trying to get stuff a little bit, and so especially with the hook plugins, trying to get stuff more broken out so we don't have to compile plugins into the SIG testing repo to actually get them to run, so we can have our own trigger-based stuff that doesn't necessarily have any portability for Kubernetes. But I think generally the bigger thing, and maybe one thing that could be broken out from your list on the second bullet, sort of one half of that support policy is finding relatively programmatic ways to determine the health of the entire Prow cluster and all of the microservices that fall in there, which I think is like a hard question in general for Kubernetes applications. But like that definitely is like a very large part of actually being able to do something reasonable in terms of support. And so we're going to try to put more of our effort to in like helping to provide more metrics and test them out and stuff.
Okay, absolutely. I guess I would sort of put that under the guise of, we in general are trying to provide more operational transparency or operational visibility into what's going on. So then the shiny thing I would show in this regard, if I can share my screen real quick, would be and maybe y'all already know this, I don't know. I looked at the monitoring thing for and Velodrome recently, and I noticed there is a fourth graph now that's time since last merge, which I believe is based on Quinton's adding the metric for when the last merge actually happened. I don't actually know what that little green line there is. Here, I'll do this for the last 7 days. But you can sort of see we get these red spikes into probably what is the threshold if that's way too much time to for there to be a last merge. If you combine that with the yellow line, which is how many PRs are queued up in the submit queue, that sort of gives us an idea that if we're sitting here waiting forever for a last merge, but the submit queue is totally empty, it's probably because it's, the middle of the night. But if we're starting to have problems like that sometime, I can't give you a good example here. I actually don't know what the failure case looks like in this graph yet, but just sort of demonstrating that, hey, we're starting to add health checks to all of our infrastructure. And so this is the health check stuff that's related to Munch GitHub and submit queue. But I just told you that we plan on getting rid of all of this and replacing it ad hoc as much as we can with Tide and Prow. And so we will need health checks and adequate visibility into what's going on there. So you can look forward to more dashboards that explain the behavior of our infrastructure. Does that make sense? So, and beyond that, does that sound like a good summary of stuff to brag to the community about? Did I sort of capture 1.9? Or sounds like silence is consent. Lazy consensus. Okay, and we've hit the 30-minute mark. Does anybody have any questions or any last-minute things we'd like to talk about?
I have one quick thing. I've been bringing up the idea recently that we should stop showing jobs that are not actually blocking on GitHub statuses because it's confusing people. I'd like to actually flip that on if everyone is okay with that and start enforcing that.
Yeah, I think a broadcast email to Kubernetes dev about the reasoning behind this would be helpful, just to let people know what's up.
So, are these jobs, nobody actually cares about that signal, or is it just a select?
There are just a few jobs that have decided that they want to start reporting to people, but they're not actually blocking the PR. So, for example, the GPU job would like to be blocking at some point, but it's not. So if it's flaking, then people are concerned that it's flaking and they want it to pass on their PR, but it might just be broken at the moment and it's not actually blocking their PR.
So there's not enough of an indication that it's non-blocking, so it confuses people.
Yeah, I know.
There is an indication, but people are not familiar enough with it, and usually they're just annoyed by it. There's a required context that gets set, but people don't pick up on that well enough.
Okay.
Then one thing that we saw moving stuff out of blocking, if it's possible, maybe changing the behavior of the robot to not delete the comment when there's no failed jobs that are blocking, just so that you still get that Kubernetes link with all of the historical stuff, so that's easy for you to say, oh, I can actually go and look at those jobs, because without the context at the bottom, you kind of have to finagle your way through Kubernetes interface to find your PR.
Yeah, I could see that being helpful. I'd say right now, since I know how it works, I go to one of the statuses and click their link.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a few things we could do separately to clean up the comments. We might also want to try to make the comments avoid mentioning tests that aren't blocking. I think it might already do a bit of that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that was just some feedback we got when we were screwing with that same area in Origin.
Yeah, I think that would be very useful. I think it might also be useful to have a comment when all of your tests have finished passing, so you don't have to keep checking your PR.
Yeah, the same way that it's really subtle to pick up on the required context thing. I think a lot of times newcomers fail to pick up on the submit queue context at the bottom that says what the next step is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a messaging thing.
Okay, which I can try and message about that during community, but yeah, I agree. It's kind of bugs me how people ask, which are the required jobs for merging? And I say, do you see the jobs that have required next to them in your pull request? But I agree, like people look at the dot next to their commit, and if the dot stays yellow because one of the non-blocking things is still non-blocking or hasn't triggered, or if they see an X because one of the non-blocking things has failed, then they think their whole commit is bad. Yeah. So it's a messaging thing. I would hope that perhaps we could somehow use Tide or Deck as a good way to say, here are all the things that ran for your PR. You can click on that instead of having to use the PR's context itself as sort of the authoritative way to find all the jobs that were kicked off because of your PR.
We've got all that in Kubernetes. I think connecting the dots from your PR to Kubernetes, the overview for your PR, is non-trivial because you kind of have to know how the GCS layout looks and stuff sometimes. So like having that link there would be super cool because that link goes away as soon as the comment's missing.
Okay, I will double check Kubernetes because being able to, I have found in the past when I like click through and show how like all this stuff is linked together, people can sometimes be like, wow, I didn't realize it worked that way. So continually reminding people that Kubernetes is a thing to which there are many links and entry and exit points would be useful. Thanks for that. Okay, we're 5 minutes over. But yeah, that was a super awesome point, Ben. I think just like make sure we broadcast to Kubernetes dev so people know what's up.
Okay.
All right. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Good to be back.